Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we have some mysteries, some disappearances. Some were solved, I think some were not. I haven't seen the video yet, so I'm going to react to it along with you. So let's get into the video, but before we do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That would help me out so much. All right, let's get into the video.
In extremely bizarre places that will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy true crime, mysteries, and true stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. The first story we are going to be covering today is that of Sandalay Sabia. It is never a particularly fun experience to break or sprain a limb. Of course, the most painful part of breaking an arm or a leg is the pain from the break itself. But the second most painful part is, admittedly, the trip to the hospital to get the break taken care of. Waiting in sitting rooms can feel like forever. Getting an X-ray can take far longer than one would like, and the actual process of having an injury put in a cast can be both tedious and uncomfortable. These were likely the thoughts that Sandalay Sabia was having on May 10th, 2019, when he accidentally hurt his right leg and realized that a trip to the hospital was in order. Sandalay, a construction worker and local of Durban, South Africa, ended up heading to Durban's Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital in the early afternoon in quite a bit of pain. When he arrived, he predictably waited his turn in the hospital's sitting room, like any other prospective patient. After what felt like an excessive waiting period, Sandalay was finally seen by a doctor and ultimately taken in for an X-ray. His X-ray came back showing that he had a broken femur and that he would definitely need further medical treatment. At the time, the staff at Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital had instructed Sandalay to stay overnight for a few days until he could be properly treated. In fact, Sandalay was set to be transferred to another nearby facility, Addington Hospital, to see a proper orthopedic doctor for his cast application. That is, if he made it that long. When the time came for Sandalay's transfer, hospital staff approached the injured man's room with his paperwork in tow. But when they entered, Sandalay Sabia was nowhere to be found. Hospital staff immediately set out in search across the facility for Sandalay, assuming that he could not have gotten very far with a severely injured leg. After checking on every floor of the building and looking into every other patient's room, the staff was dumbfounded at the notion that Sandalay seemed to have vanished into thin air. But how could a man with a very...
How do you just disappear? You just don't disappear in a hospital. Especially when you're in a hospital gown and stuff. How you just going to disappear? Nobody's going to see where you went. They're going to leave you alone for that long to where you can disappear. Just, they think he got up and walked out? It doesn't make any sense at all.
The obviously broken leg have made it all the way out of a secure hospital building. Sandalay's disappearance appeared to make no sense to anyone working in Mahatma Gandhi Memorial, so staff were quick to report the man officially missing to local authorities. The South African Police Department opened a missing persons case immediately for Sandalay, and authorities across Durban set out on a small-scale search for him. Unfortunately, despite search efforts, not a single person could locate any sign of Sandalay. A variety of theories arose surrounding Sandalay's mysterious disappearance, but none sounded feasible, and no one had any information to work with to determine why Sandalay would have gone missing in the first place. Back at the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital, staff could not help but be incredibly concerned for Sandalay's well-being. They were meant to help treat his right femur, and he somehow managed to disappear right under their noses. And perhaps that is exactly where they should have checked. Ultimately, it was the smell that gave it away.
Oh, no.
According to KZN Health MEC Nomagugu Simelane Zulu, on May 24, 2019, Just 10 days after Sandalay had originally come into the hospital, something was terribly wrong. Nomagugu stated, quote, "An unbearable stench intensified at the hospital, and eventually it led to the storeroom where fluid dropping from the ceiling provided the telltale signs that something was amiss." As the stench began to spread throughout the entirety of the hospital building, hospital staff decided to investigate its source themselves. What they found completely shocked them. When hospital staff finally stumbled upon the storeroom that the horrid smell was emanating from, they cautiously pushed up against the ceiling tiles. When they lifted their flashlights into the space to have a look around, they came face to face with a decomposing body. The body of Sandalay Subbiah. When the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital staff reported the discovered body to local police and positively identified him as the man who had mysteriously disappeared from the hospital almost 2 weeks before, questions arose surrounding the context of Sandalay's death. Sandalay, despite his broken femur, was an incredibly healthy 53-year-old man who was more than capable of taking care of himself. So, how did he end up dead in a hospital ceiling? The hospital itself assured local citizens and police personnel that their facility had impeccably tight security measures in place, with security guards in every unit of the hospital grounds. In fact, they even asserted that the only way runaway patients would be able to slip past security within the hospital grounds is if they were to change into civilian clothing during the busiest parts of the hospital's visiting hours. And yet, Sandalay was found decomposing inside the ceiling of a room only.
This had to be somebody in the hospital. Somebody had to have done something to this man, because how is he going to get up, walk to a storage room, and get into a storage room that's usually supposed to be locked at a hospital, and get past security and all that? It has to be something. Maybe somebody gave him something and he ended up dying from it. They didn't want to be getting in trouble. I don't know.
Accessible to hospital staff. When the investigation into Sandalay's disappearance and subsequent death began, many officials believed that Sandalay had actually been one of the hospital's mentally ill patients. In fact, early reports of Sandalay's initial discovery even went so far as to report that Sandalay had actually been a mental patient before his disappearance, which was eventually proved to be false by the hospital. Throughout the investigation, officials were adamant that they would take the strongest possible action should anyone be found guilty of any form of wrongdoing. Despite this, Sandalay's death still remains a mystery.
That's sad.
And the way his body ended up in the ceiling panels of the very same hospital he came to for help just days before his death is also still completely unknown. The second bizarre case we have for you today is that of Brian Egg. Brian Egg was born and raised in San Francisco and spent the majority of the later years of his life living in San Francisco's South of Market neighborhood, after having spent some of his youth working as a bartender at the legendary gay bar, The Stud. Brian's family resided just outside of the Soma neighborhood and visited with Brian every so often when their respective schedules lined up properly. When visiting each other was not particularly feasible, Brian and his brother would simply give each other a call on the phone to discuss the recent events of their lives. One thing was certain between Brian and his family. Communication was a crucial part of maintaining their strong familial relations. In late May or early June of 2018, Brian hadn't had much time to speak with his family, as it seemed as though everyone's lives were pointing in different directions. In response, Brian decided to help out his community more frequently during his own free time. Brian was known to clean up some of the alleyways in his Soma neighborhood whenever he had the chance, and he was actually seen doing so over one particular weekend. After he had finished picking up trash in his neighborhood, he had apparently gone back into his house, according to his neighbors. And that was the last time anyone ever saw Brian Egg alive. In late June or early July of the same year, just around a month after Brian's neighbors had reportedly seen the 65-year-old man tidying up the neighborhood, Brian's brother Devin tried to call Brian in order to catch up on their recent life events. When Devin called Brian's home phone number, however, he was met with an answering machine requesting he leave a message. There were two things strikingly wrong about the answering machine picking up Devin's call. One, Brian almost always answered his phone and had never used an answering machine in his life. And two, the voice on the machine was most definitely not that of his brother's. Devin checked the number he had dialed to confirm that he had, in fact, called the correct number. After noting that it belonged to his brother's phone, Devin attempted to call once more. This time, Devin was not met with the sound of an answering machine. This time, someone picked up. According to Devin, a man who gave his name as Nate allegedly answered Brian's phone and asked whom he was speaking to. Devin explained that he was Brian's brother and was trying to reach Brian at his phone number. Nate assured Devin that his brother would call him back shortly, and that Brian was simply outside taking his dog on a walk around the neighborhood. As strange as the situation sounded, Devin nonetheless found himself waiting for his brother to give him a call back. Unfortunately, that call would never come. Devin was not entirely worried about his brother's odd behavior, as it was possible that Brian was simply busy or had made new friends who he hadn't met. But by late July of 2018, it became evident to Brian's neighbors that the man seemed to be missing. You see, Brian was one of the few members of the Soma neighborhood who was familiar with almost everyone else. When multiple neighbors realized that they had not seen Brian for quite some time, word started to spread fast, and a variety of people became extremely worried.
Whatever man answered that phone has to know that he didn't have a lot of contact with his family. They had to know that he didn't really talk to many people at all, because if it takes that long to get the police involved for a disappearance, yeah, he didn't talk to very many people.
Worried for the man's well-being. Police received multiple calls from Brian's neighbors stating their concern regarding the fact that Brian may have been missing or seriously injured inside his home. Officers decided to take the time to check out Brian's home and see if the man was in need of some assistance. However, every time the police came by, Brian was nowhere to be found. More so than that, no one ever answered the door. For one reason or another, police determined that Brian must have gone out of town without letting any of his neighbors know. Because of these assumptions, the police appeared not too concerned about Brian's apparent disappearance. The residents of the Soma neighborhood, however, felt far differently. One of Brian's longtime neighbors, Scott Free, decided to take to social media to spread word of Brian's possible disappearance, as he and his other neighbors were concerned that the police were not taking their claims seriously. After Scott's posts about Brian started to circulate, many other neighbors who knew Brian added fuel to the fire by stating that they were also worried about the man. Collectively, the neighborhood came to an agreement and vowed to keep an eye on Brian's home and stay on the lookout for any suspicious activity, or, ultimately, any sign of Brian. With all eyes on Brian's home, it was only a matter of time before his Soma neighborhood noticed something particularly out of place. Neighbors claimed to see two strangers to the neighborhood frequently coming and going from Brian's home. No one in the neighborhood had ever seen the two young men before, but they were positive that Brian had no relation to them whatsoever. The residents of Soma found themselves once again trying to convince local San Francisco police to look into Brian's disappearance. Though their efforts alone seemed to be rather unsuccessful, Brian's sister also became concerned about the fact that no one in their family had heard from Brian in months. So, after multiple calls from both Soma neighbors and Brian's own family, a few officers decided to stop by Brian's house once more on August 4th. When police knocked on the front door, they were once again met with silence. According to Brian's neighbors, the two men they had seen appeared to be homeless and seemed to be living inside of Brian's house for quite some time, which partially explained the fact that no one in the neighborhood had seen Brian recently. Though the two strangers had not answered the door, nor spoke to police, neighbors saw a significant difference in the state of Brian's home after the officers' third attempt at checking in. Just hours after police left Brian's home, neighbors claimed they watched an obscene amount of soap suds leak out from under the door. In addition to the soap, neighbors said that when they approached Brian's house, they could smell the strong scent of bleach. After the end of what they claim...
then people probably killed him, and he was out picking up trash. He probably met these men, and this is what happened to him. What you get for trying to be a good citizen. That's horrible. Horrible.
Appeared to be an extremely deep home cleaning session. The strangers from Brian's house were even reportedly seen painting over a section of the front of the home,
All the cops.
including part of the front door, as if to cover something up. On August 7th, Brian's sister officially reported Brian missing, and by August 14th, the Soma residents ended up calling police yet again.
We are 2 months into this investigation, into people calling the police, and the police have not entered the home yet. What is wrong with these police officers? When something's up, and something's fishy, then check it out. Gosh, what's the worst that could happen? Something happened to this man.
After reportedly seeing a private crime scene cleanup company parked outside of Brian's home for an extended period of time. This time, police responded to the neighbors' claims right away and dispatched a variety of officers to Brian's house. There, officers were able to arrest one of the two strangers who the police report stated had been cohabitating in Brian's home for nearly 2 months. The police report stated that the man was 52-year-old Robert McCaffrey, who Brian's neighbors said had at least $1,000 in cash on hand that they alleged he was going to use to pay the crime scene cleanup company.
How'd they know that?
Just 2 days later, police were able to locate who they said was the other alleged person of interest in Brian's disappearance, 39-year-old Lance Silva, and subsequently arrested him in a nearby residential hotel. Upon both men being arrested and interviewed, police charged both men with ID theft and financial crimes, as it was alleged that Robert and Lance had used Brian's credit cards to possibly purchase a car. One thing that was still unclear to investigators at the time was Brian's whereabouts. In the hours after Robert and Lance's initial arrests, police returned to Brian's home to thoroughly search for clues regarding Brian's whereabouts. That is, if he was still alive. On August 17, 2018, after 4 days of searching the home, police discovered something they never saw coming. Inside Brian's home was a storage room located directly under a staircase. When police opened up the storage room, they were immediately met with an unbearable stench.
Oh my gosh.
Inside was one singular fish tank, hidden away out of sight. It was then that investigators noticed that there was something peculiar stuffed inside of the fish tank. It was the torso of a body that had been beheaded and had its hands removed. The gruesome body was all that was left of Brian Egg. Brian's death was ultimately ruled a homicide by a San Francisco medical examiner, and both Robert and Lance were charged with homicide, identity theft, elder abuse, and various financial crimes. Despite this, the San Francisco District Attorney's Office eventually ended up dropping all of the charges against both men, pending further investigation. Robert was ultimately freed, and Lance ended up being held in jail in Alameda County for a parole violation. But ultimately, Lance too was freed from jail. To this day, no one has been deemed guilty in court for Brian Egg's gruesome death.
How in the world did they get let out of jail? How in the world did nobody be charged with this? That is horrible. Obviously, they're guilty. They're using the man's credit card. They beheaded downstairs and they get let off. That makes no sense. What is our American justice system coming to today?
And over a year after Brian's dismembered body was found stuffed into a chemical-filled fish tank in his own home, his killer, or killers, remain at large. Finally, the last case we have for you today is one that involves a lot of secrecy and plenty of unanswered questions. In the ruins of Rheinavold in the Netherlands, day-to-day life has almost always been extremely consistent. Rheinavold is a place where everyone knows everyone, and rumors spread like wildfire when gossip starts. At least the most interesting ones do. The residents of Rheinavold tend to keep to themselves for the most part, but are nonetheless familiar with the different lives being lived in the areas around them. Or at least, they thought they were. In October of 2020, a local Dutch cafe called De Kastelein welcomed a new customer for the first time in a long time. As Rheinavold was a primarily rural farm town, cafes like De Kastelein did not often see the likes of tourists, and when they did, the tourists did not act as strange as the young man who had come to visit on that fateful day in early October. The cafe staff described the man as rather scrawny and said that he seemed almost incapable of making and keeping eye contact with anyone he spoke with. At first, it was not clear to anyone else in the cafe if the young man could even speak their language, until he eventually spoke up to place his order. When he did speak, the man ordered 5 pints of beer that he intended to drink alone. When the cafe staff brought him his order, the young man downed all 5 beers in one go, leaving everyone around him curious as to what had brought the man here, and why he seemed to be acting so very strange. The cafe closed shortly after the run-in with the thirsty young man, and the cafe staff assumed they would never see him again. However, the very next evening, the young man came back to the same cafe, acting just as strange as he had the night before. The staff eyed the young man closely, as it appeared that there was something he desperately wanted to say, though he remained silent. Until, finally, he cracked. The cafe staff continued striking up conversations with the young man, as there was something so peculiar about the way he acted. Everyone assumed something was off, but they couldn't tell what it was. Prompted by the curiosity and concern of the cafe staff and the beer in his belly, the strange young man blurted out something he knew was meant to be kept a secret. According to the De Kastelein cafe owner, Chris Westerbeek, the young man, quote, said he had not been outside for 9 years. Later, he also said that he had 4 brothers and 1 sister who lived on the farm. He was the oldest and wanted to put an end to the way they lived. At first, Chris and the other employees from the cafe did not know how to handle the information they had gathered from the strange young man. Some of the staff speculated that the man could just be out of his mind, or even alleged he could be on some kind of drug. But others saw the desperation in the young man's face and believed that he was truly scared for his own well-being, even if his claims seemed wildly outlandish in their small village. Chris decided to stay cautious and call local Rheineveld police to look into the young man's strange and concerning claims. When he did so, he had no idea what would come of it. When asked further questions about his circumstances, the young man allegedly claimed he had been inside for 9 years because of some kind of religion or a cult, but nothing more. The next day, following Chris Westerbeek's concerned call to police, authorities acted on the complaint and visited the house on the Buitenhuizerweg. When they arrived on the plot of land, they were shocked to discover what was going on just inside of a farmhouse that local residents passed by every single day. The house was situated over 200 yards from the nearest road and 100 yards from the nearest building, which meant people passing by couldn't easily see what was happening. Inside the farmhouse, on the ground floor, was a small room that officers had initially assumed to be empty. When they took a look inside, however, they were taken aback at what they found. Police said that inside the small room, they found multiple people, an entire family. Upon being questioned by police, every single member of the family claimed that they were all over 18 years old and adults, though none of them could give police any straight answers as to why they were all cramped into a single room. Police noted that there were 6 people living in seclusion on the farm, in addition to 25-year-old Jan, who had been the first and only member of the hidden family to escape into town in over 9 whole years.
Thank goodness.
Jan was the weary stranger at the De Castellan Cafe who had been nervous and uneasy to tell anyone the truth surrounding his circumstances. Upon their discovery, police learned that all 6 of the people hidden away in the farmhouse were actually between the ages of 12 and 15, not 18 as they had originally claimed. They appeared to have been taught to lie about their age if they were ever discovered. Though some of them were not very willing to leave the premises, police had all 6 of the children taken into police care and ensured that they were all immediately seen by a doctor to gauge their health. Police were initially uncertain as to whether or not the family had been living in the farmhouse voluntarily, and, more pressingly, how they came to be there in the first place. Later into the investigation, the police report stated that all 6 of the children who had been hidden away in the farmhouse had never actually been included in the official registers, meaning that they had allegedly been born in secret and kept completely away from the rest of society. Police were quick in tracking down who they believed was the father of the 6 children, 67-year-old Gerrit Jan van D. Gerrit was taken into custody, but only after investigators alleged that he had not been alone.
Where's the mother? These are children that are going to be messed up for the rest of their lives because of this. What sick man or what would cause someone to do that to their kids? I mean, these poor kids. How could you ever expect them to live a normal life now? I mean, that's just disgustingly horrible. Makes me so mad.
And purportedly keeping his children in isolation. Police said they tracked down an Austrian man by the name of Joseph B., who locals had known as an odd jobs man who had rented the farmhouse. It is alleged by investigators that the 2 men were running what they referred to in the police report as some kind of doomsday cult with no connection to the outside world. The BBC reported that over the years, Gerrit is believed to have allegedly mistreated most of the children, though none of the children ended up filing any kind of formal complaints against their father or Joseph. As the investigation went on, police learned that Gerrit actually had 3 older daughters who had managed to leave the home before the family reportedly withdrew from society. Upon the police's discovery of his alleged cult formation, Gerrit was also reportedly charged with money laundering, unlawful detention, and more. Yosef B. was charged and is suspected of kidnapping and money laundering. According to authorities, quote, both Garrett and Yosef knew very well what they were doing was punishable by law, and Garrett Van D was the evil genius, but Yosef B was his partner in crime. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators claimed to have found evidence that the children were mistreated while at the farm. The prosecution alleged that the children were required to pray for weeks at a time, and on occasion were reportedly only given water to drink and nothing to eat. At trial, many of the children stated that they had been purportedly physically punished by Garrett in various ways, which they described as being hit with sticks to being forced to sit in ice baths until they lost consciousness.
That's sick. I can't believe it. Something else has to be. There's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to it than what we're being told right here.
Prosecution also reported that the children were allegedly punished in order to drive out bad spirits, or when Garrett believed that they had been unclean. Police said that they found evidence of such claims, also reported in Garrett's own diary entries, which were obtained during the investigation. The investigation into the strange circumstances surrounding the family's isolation is still underway to this day. Both Yosef and Garrett remain in police custody, while investigators attempt to have a better understanding of what exactly took place at the farm over the course of the last 9 years. In the meantime, Jan and the
All right, that's pretty hard to watch, man, especially when it involves children. These children are going to be messed up for the rest of their lives. How do you expect them to ever live a normal life and go on, have a family of their own, and not be messed up? That's how serial killers come. That's how serial killers are made. That's how criminals become criminals. People messing with these poor kids' heads. All right. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and until the next one, I'm out. Also, comment down below. Let me know what you thought of the video. Bye.